Today, we are diving into one of the most foundational, most dramatic, and one of the most intensely debated stories in all of Scripture, the saga of Abraham and his two sons. The two sons who would literally go on to shape the history of the world.
But before we get into all the epic events, let me ask you something, just personally. If you were promised something you wanted more than anything else in the entire world, how long would you wait for it? A year? 5 years? Maybe 10? Abraham and Sarah waited 25 years, a quarter of a century. That's how much time passed between God's initial promise and when it finally came true. Just let that sink in for a minute. So here's the setup. God calls this 75-year-old man, Abraham, and promises him that he'll have offspring as numerous as the stars in the sky. There's just one problem. His wife, Sarah, is barren, and neither of them are getting any younger. And right there, that's the core conflict of the whole story, a divine promise clashing with human impossibility. As the years just ticked by, with no results, doubt started to creep in. And when faith starts to waver, our own human logic usually tries to take the wheel. And that brings us to the first major turn in our story, the attempt to kind of help God out. Yeah, this really gets to the heart of it. After a whole decade of waiting, Sarah comes up with a plan. She gives her Egyptian maidservant, Hagar, to Abraham so Hagar can have a child for her. Now, while this was actually a cultural norm back then, it was, at its core, a human solution to a divine problem. And the plan? Well, it works, in a way. Hagar gets pregnant, and Ishmael is born. So Abraham has a son. But this wasn't the promised son. This was the son who came from human planning, an attempt to make God's promise happen through their own strength and their own cleverness, not through faith in God's power. But see, God hadn't forgotten his original promise, not at all. And his timing, as we're about to see, was designed for maximum impact. It was designed to leave absolutely no doubt about who was really in charge here. So, 14 years after Ishmael was born, when Abraham is 100 years old and Sarah is 90, the impossible happens. Sarah gives birth to a son. God literally waited until they were so far past childbearing age that no one could ever claim it was just a natural thing. It was purely and simply a miracle. And they named him Isaac, which actually means laughter. And you want to know why? Because when God first told them they'd have a child at their age, they both laughed. It was the laugh of disbelief. But now, that skepticism was transformed into the laughter of pure, uncontainable joy. But that joy, it just sets the stage for the story's terrifying climax. God has given Abraham the son he waited 25 years for, this miracle child. And then he asks for him back, in the most harrowing way you can possibly imagine. The command is just chilling. And listen to the language. Your son, your only son, whom you love. It's like every phrase is designed to twist the knife, to hammer home the massive weight of what God is asking Abraham to do. This isn't just some test. This is the ultimate test of faith and love. You know, what makes this whole thing so agonizing is the journey itself. Abraham doesn't just have to make a snap decision. He has to live with it. For 3 whole days, over a 50-mile trek, he walks with his beloved son, knowing what he's been told to do at the end of it. Can you even imagine the internal battle raging inside him during that long, silent walk? Now, here's something a lot of people get wrong. We often picture Abraham dragging a small, unwilling little boy up that mountain. But Jewish and historical sources suggest Isaac was a young man, maybe in his 20s or even 30s. He carried the wood for his own sacrifice. This completely reframes the whole scene. It wasn't coercion. It was more than likely 2 men, a father and son, walking together in obedience. And get this, the location itself adds this whole other layer of meaning. The place, Moriah, becomes sacred ground. It's the very spot where Solomon's temple would later be built in Jerusalem. And for Christians, it's also identified with Calvary, the hill where Jesus was crucified. This one spot becomes a focal point of redemptive history for thousands of years. So Abraham builds the altar, he binds his son, he raises the knife, and at the very last second, an angel of the Lord calls out, stopping him, and there, caught in a nearby thicket, is a ram, provided as a substitute. The test was never about God wanting child sacrifice. It was about Abraham's heart. Was he willing to put God before even God's single greatest gift to him? He was. Okay, so the story itself is incredibly powerful, but what does it all mean? That's just as important. For thousands of years, people have looked at these two half-brothers, Ishmael and Isaac, and found these profound theological meanings in their differences. So, in Jewish theology, the contrast is often framed like this. Ishmael represents a rational, understandable relationship with God. He's born naturally, he enters the covenant at age 13 when he can actually comprehend it. Isaac, on the other hand, represents a bond that goes beyond logic. It's a super-rational faith. His birth is a miracle, and he enters the covenant at just 8 days old, an act of pure faith, not of understanding. Now, if you look at it from a Christian perspective, especially from the Apostle Paul, this whole story is seen as an allegory. Ishmael, the son born from human effort, represents trying to earn your salvation through following laws and doing good works. But Isaac, the son born from a miracle, represents salvation that you receive as a totally free gift through promise and grace. It's a huge contrast between what we can do versus what God gives. But of course, not everyone sees this as a straightforward story of pure faith. From a more critical and academic viewpoint, the story is actually deeply troubling. This perspective points out that the narrative never explicitly says child sacrifice is wrong, which, was a known practice in the ancient world. Philosophers like Immanuel Kant argued that any command that violates a fundamental moral law couldn't possibly come from God, which raises some profound questions about faith and blind obedience. What's really fascinating is how the three great Abrahamic faiths see the same core story through such different lenses. For Christians, it's a test of faith that points forward, foreshadowing God's sacrifice of his own son Jesus. For Jews, it's the Akedah, or the binding, the ultimate test of obedience. And in Islamic tradition, it's actually believed that it was Ishmael, not Isaac, on the altar, which cements his role as a key prophet. So in the end, this one story really does contain multitudes. It's a bedrock narrative for billions of believers around the globe. It's a complex, thorny puzzle for philosophers and ethicists, and at its very heart, it's a family drama whose consequences have been echoing through history ever since. So, I'll leave you with this question. What is this story fundamentally about? Is it a story about the absolute pinnacle of human faith? Is it a lesson in receiving grace instead of trying to earn it? Or is it a deeply troubling account of a divine command? The answer isn't simple, and how you choose to answer it says a lot about the meaning you find in this ancient, powerful narrative.